Hey, Priti.
Hi, Simon. How are you doing?
Well, welcome to the program today, Priti. Lovely to have you on, and I'm looking forward to chatting.
Yep. Thanks for having me, Simon. I definitely am excited about this opportunity and talking to you.
Now, I always ask, how did you come to Treasury and what made you choose Treasury as your career?
I have to say I was very fortunate. I was at Altera at that time, and so it was an internal opportunity that opened up. I was at Altera, and now, of course, it's been acquired by Intel, but at that time, so I was at Altera for almost 8 years. I started my career there as a financial analyst, supporting the manufacturing departments, forecasts and budgets, moved to the R&D side of things. So manufacturing and R&D supporting budgets and all the financial analysis for those teams. And I was always fascinated by this. I always thought it was an elusive, exclusive group, the Treasury team, where they were kind of, always talking. When we used to get together as a finance team, we would all go through our budgets, and the Treasury team would always talk about these economic impact that they had, whether it was interest income through investments. It was always fascinating to me. And so when somebody, left the team and an internal opportunity opened up, I immediately kind of raised my hand and, hoped, I didn't have any experience in what they needed, but I hoped that I would get that opportunity. And sure enough, at that time, the CFO and the VP of Tax and Treasury, they were very supportive to have an internal candidate. So I guess I was lucky enough to get that break, and I haven't looked back since.
Absolutely. So just for the listeners, you grew up in India, you then studied in Singapore for some time, in Australia for some time, and then into the US.
Yeah.
Talk to me about being a global citizen and the challenges of making those moves across three very different cultures.
All these moves, actually, these multiple moves that I have are mainly driven by a family moving, as well as the education opportunities. Even growing up in India, the first years through high school or undergraduation I spent in India. I was born there and I grew up there. So even there, because of my father's work, we kept moving to different cities. So every 3 years, he would be relocated to a new city. So by the time I finished high school, I'd already changed 8 schools. So I don't know how familiar you are with India, but each different state or city you move to, the language at school, the second language you pick up. I mean, it was always English, but the state language, the national language. I mean, you end up learning multiple languages. Culturally, the states are very different. The North and the South are very different. So I would say that right through childhood, the only constant in my life was these changes. We constantly move to different places. And so I just thought that was a way of life. So new neighbors, new schools, new friends. That was definitely a constant in my life. And then as I moved to college, it became different countries as well. So for me, that was really part of life. In fact, I would say currently where I am in San Jose in California in the US, this has been the longest I've ever been, more than 20 years in one place and, one home. So
you were really born into it then, Priti. It was one of those things.
I have to say that.
Global citizen.
I have to say that, I think I love the way, and we love traveling as a family. We definitely, go on vacations. And I always feel I was fortunate to be living in these places because when you go as a tourist versus, you actually live there, like in Australia, when I was there for a year, took 2 months, went backpacking all around Australia. I mean, that you'll never get that time back and that experience back. So
absolutely. So now just to talk on your career, you started your career in the US with Selectron. You moved to Altera, as you just mentioned, in the semiconductor space. You then went to Symantec in the tech space, 4 years with Thoratech in the medical devices, before your role now with Logitech, which has been the last 8 years. What would you say have been the highlights in your career so far?
All these, so when I started out at Altera, when I got that break to move, it it to Treasury. I mean, that's where I learned the, core, I would say the basic nuts and bolts of Treasury, cash management, bank administration. That is what I was responsible for at Altera. Then when I moved to Symantec, it was a short tenure, but just because, I was part of the investments team. So I got an opportunity, they had a fairly large internal portfolio as well as external portfolios to manage. So I got a chance to, really start investing in, different kinds of securities there. And so my investments knowledge definitely, started and got built there. My next opportunity was at Thoratech. Now, Thoratech was a much smaller company, but they were growing rapidly. They just had an FDA approval when I joined, and they were growing rapidly. And in Europe, sales were picking up. At that time, the opportunity for me was when the functional currency in the London entity, they wanted to move it from GBP to euros, and that gave me a sense or an understanding of FX like I would never have been able to get anywhere else, because it was like, you're actually dismantling all the current hedging program. And then, then from scratch, you're building, you're understanding how the new exposures would work. And so I would say it was really, understanding it at that granularity and that level. And all these experiences. And then when I moved to Logitech, kind of all this came together for me, because at Logitech, I don't know if you're aware, but Logitech is a Swiss company. And the opportunity that I had there was, at that time, Logitech was about 30 years old as a company. Treasury was always managed out of Switzerland, but they brought me in to really bring the Treasury role, Treasury team to the US, because the CEO, CFO, all the decision makers were based in the US. So it was like building the whole Treasury network from scratch, hiring new people, building it out, and giving it kind of a global perspective. And so all these experiences that I had early on in my career, the cash management, and then the investments, and then the FX, all that kind of came together for me at Logitech, because I was able to build things from scratch, from grounds up, what worked, what could be a more efficient way of doing things, etc. So I got that opportunity, and and that's been a fascinating journey.
And you also involved now, like whilst you're the treasurer, you've also got the credit and collection side of things. How do you find the difference between the two, and is that a good combination?
I think it's a fantastic combination, because I think as part of Treasury, you're tasked with, understanding, the cash flow, you have to, give a forecast, understand how you can improve it. And you kind of from the outside working with, the collections teams and, payables, etc., to understand what currencies are we going to collect and collecting in, what the timing is, and when the payables are coming. But now, as being a core member, or, or having that function as part of yours, in fact, I've looped in Treasury is actually responsible for those forecasts, so that, then we can, plan for our FX risks better. And honestly, the expertise lies, differently, because when you talk to collectors and, hey, can you give me your forecast? They're looking at, their customers, and their, the perspective is very different. And kind of now as a, I've kind of elevated the whole Treasury and collections, kind of look at it from a global perspective, a consolidated perspective. And so Treasury benefits because, the forecasts, are more crisp and, more pointed the way Treasury would like it, and how can we manage risks. And the collections team also knows, how their information is getting used, and, kind of, I feel that synergy is much more. And I have to tell you something, being in, just being in Treasury, we used to see the cash coming in, we are a cash rich company. You see the cash coming in and you're just planning the investments. But now I have a whole new level of appreciation of how difficult it is to actually get the cash. If a customer actually says, hey, you assume they owe, they owe us 20 million, you think you're just going to collect 20 million like that. But no, there's so many aspects in between from when you place, the invoices placed to actually you collect the cash, and are you going to get that 20 million, or what is behind that? And, just getting a whole appreciation and understanding of that also, helps you, in the long run to improve your cash conversion cycle, because, then you're thinking more along, DSO and, how, because cash is king, cash is valuable. So how do you improve these things? So unless you get your hands dirty and kind of understand the operations part of it, it's much easier to make an impact that way than just from a treasury standpoint, looking at, okay, cash is coming, let me just invest it and, improve cash that way.
Now, Priti, you've been on a huge systems transformation recently, stemming from a lack of visibility around the information that's in your data. Talk us through the dashboard that you've created in the cash conversion cycle project that you've been through.
Mm-hmm. So this is still in progress, but the ultimate goal, like I had mentioned, is when you talk to senior management, you talk to the CFOs, like, how do I improve my cash conversion cycle? How do we improve our working capital? And when all the questions point to that, and as I was just mentioning about collections, just taking just a collections perspective, for DSO, you look at collections, how do you improve your collections? And that example that I mentioned, 20 million was expected, did we collect it, or what went wrong there? You realize there's so many aspects to it. Could be that we delivered the wrong product, therefore the customer didn't pay, or there were some shipping delays, or there were returns, or there were, so the forecast has 20 million, but you end up only getting 3 million or 4 million. And so many things could have happened along the way. So when you take a broader picture, you're expecting, 500,000, 1 million, 2 million, for the quarter. And, you're up or down, here and there. How do you improve that? And how do you improve the visibility? How do you get it crisper? And as I was getting closer to trying and understanding that, I realized there was no easy way. I mean, we have one system, we have Oracle, but, were there any returns? That's a different screen. Were there any, was there any other issues? For one customer, a collector had to go through like 6 or 7 different screens, multiplied, about 400 customers that we have. The answer is not easily or readily available. And that's really where I said, if we want to make an impact, we have to spend less time on the data collection and more time on the analytics, on actually how to improve the steps. And so for that, I started looking at, more of a cloud-based system where, you can quickly, slice and dice your information in different ways, kind of, hey, who are the top 25 who are paying late? What is the pattern? How do you understand what's happening? Why are they, who do we focus on as customers? Because there's so many customers, and even if it's the same customer, depending on the region you are, or it's slice and dice differently, it's very difficult to get, a full picture. So that's what actually drove this whole process of, how do we get more visibility into the data? And that's where, okay, Tableau is, a means to it. So that's what we are working on. But how do you get the data into the cloud and into Tableau so you can, slice and dice it differently, as I mentioned, so that, you can then make the right decisions or influence decisions, go to sales teams. Do you realize that they're consistently taking 40% deductions? I mean, is that what was planned for you? So you can actually have meaningful conversations with your sales partners, and then, slowly and say, oh, really? I didn't realize that. I mean, why are these being in constant disputes and things like that? So showing data and then getting results out of it, taking that back, and then ultimately the goal is, we improve our cash collections. Absolutely.
And it's interesting because I'm a big fan of that. I think there's so much data nowadays, yes, but not many people actually have the information. And it's being able to move that from data to being information that's really important. An interesting one for you. I'm actually interviewing Ed Barry, who's the treasurer at Tableau next week. So just as you're using Tableau. How valuable then was this dashboard during the recent pandemic and going through that COVID environment?
it's been fantastic. So every day I now have a team meeting, like at 7 a.m. in the morning, 8 a.m. in the morning, California time. So because most of the team is in Ireland, and then I also have team members in Taiwan. So we just have that standard, morning calls where, it's night for Taiwan, it's evening in Ireland. We just go through the whole AR, because I mean, where's the risk? The risk is, who's going to pay, who's not going to pay, which customer, where's the risk with which customer, and, who's paying late. So literally, just before my call, or an hour before my call, my analytics person actually pulls the data together, already summarizes the data, and this is all available on the dashboard. So all they have to do is kind of pull, so all the collectors have already gone and put their comments. And so I have this nice, 5-line summary, kind of, here's the aging, here's what is aged, here are the risks, and then we just, focus on if it's, the customer level, or, the age data, or who's asked for extension. So it's very easy and very efficient to just go through that. So almost every day we are going through 400 customers globally. Within an hour, we're just able to go from start to finish, because we can identify the risk and zoom into that. So,
and the next phase for you, now that you've got this information, Priti, is taking it through AI and machine learning. Are the team worried about being replaced now you've got to this point?
No, not at all. In fact, if anything, it's, I think, more exciting, because all these companies that I worked for, one of the things is, you have to do more with less. So the company is growing. When I joined Logitech, we were close to 2 billion. Now we are 3 billion. The group hasn't grown. It's the same number of people, and we've been more acquisitive as a company. So we're doing more with the same resource. And so how do you get more efficient so that you can actually get to, adding value, rather than, like I said, collecting data or collecting information, or just waiting for that cash to come in, rather than being more proactive. Hey, I expected this payment to come, or I'm expecting this payment to come next week. Are you going to be paying, so that, we can manage our risk, rather than, oh, they were supposed to pay 2 weeks ago, but now that I look at my aging, they haven't paid. So we're just being more proactive. And even with collections or forecasting, I mean, consistently I've been missing my forecast, collections forecast, by 40, 50 million easily. And that's not because of, the customers didn't pay, but it's like, how do we analyze the payment patterns? They always pay on the 30th of every month, and our month end was, on the 28th. So we shouldn't have included these customers in the first place, or, they tend to take, this customer's pattern, they tend to take 20% deductions. So let's adjust our forecast accordingly. I mean, at that granularity, today we are not doing it. We're not going at a customer payment pattern, level. And that's where I see AI and machine learning as a tool. We were actually going to kick off the project a couple of months ago, but because of COVID, it got pushed out. So next week, actually, this is the first time, we are actually going to be sitting down with our data science team. And they were surprised, because I was the first person from finance to actually reach out to them. And so we're actually going to start this pilot project. Essentially, how do we identify payment patterns, and how then, broadly, take it across all our customers. And once we succeed in that, and then we come to, kind of estimating a DSO better, then I want to do the same thing on the payment side, so for the DPO. So ultimately, the goal is, how do you get a better analytics around your cash conversion cycle?
Now, Priti, you guys are a really cash-rich business. Mm-hmm. Tell the listeners about, you took the investment interest from 800,000 a year to 10 million a year. What did you do? What's your secret to this? That's amazing.
Actually, that kind of defines my first 4 years at Logitech. So as I mentioned, my task was, to build from scratch the Treasury team in the US. And so for the first 2 months, when I was just observing and trying to understand how where's our cash? Because, we are in 40 different countries, we collect in, 38 plus currencies, etc. So, just trying to understand that. Now, what had happened was for the first 30 years of Logitech's life, we were, growing at a double-digit pace. And as a result, decisions for the banking, etc., were all made at local level. So if I just took the US entity as an example, the payroll manager went with one bank, and I was Union Bank of California, a local bank. The AP manager went with a different bank. The collections team went with a different bank. The sales team, when they would sell through Logitech.com, the money coming in, that was connected to a fourth bank. And just one entity, we had 5 different banks, trying to do different things. Take it globally across 40 different entities, we had about 52 banks which were responsible for cash management. And even if you keep, 500K, $500,000 across all these accounts, the cash was spread in multiple currencies, and there was no way that you could have any kind of efficiency that way. So that was my first thing I noticed. Okay, first of all, Treasury needs to control the cash, and we need to consolidate so that we can actually do something with it. So that was really the simple idea it started with, but it took 9 months for me to kind of get that proposal up and running, who the bank is going to be. And remember, it was a Swiss bank, only Swiss partners. So I come in and I say, because of the scale of what I proposed, kind of have a global bank. It's usually the American banks that have that magnitude or the presence globally. And so I think 6 months of the 9 months I was fighting, which is going to be the right bank, because making an American bank the main bank was also not part of the DNA for the company. So there were a lot of changes that had to be made. But ultimately, we kicked off the project. We had a global bank where everybody would kind of, all the operations would move there. So the collections, payroll, and AP, and then the rest we had what I would call as treasury partners, where you had your investments and FX. So that whole thing, I mean, we started off with moving things in the US, and then went country by country. So by the time we got through 40 countries, it like I mentioned, it took 3 years. But ultimately, no secret sauce. It's just a matter of control and consolidation of cash. So as a result, there was no concept of interest income. You earned what you did, because of whatever was in the cash. And if it was in the US, you don't earn anything if it's in your checking account, as you say, or current account. Whereas in Europe and Asia, you would earn something. So that's why it was not meaningful. It was 800K or so. But as we developed this consolidation and control of cash, and no leaving of excess cash anywhere, because that, Treasury would, kind of, we started off the forecast, how much cash, when is the payroll timing, you don't need cash, we're going to pull it. If the exchange rate is favorable, we're going to convert it to USD, because that was a choice of currency. So just putting those things in place is all it took. And after 3 years, that was our first year, we earned 1.5 million, because it was about, a quarter or 2 quarters worth. The following year, it was 5 million, then it became 8 million. And we just closed this year, because March 31st was our fiscal calendar year end, at 10 million. So
that's an amazing achievement. Well done.
So definitely a very proud, and then along the way, how we had the workstation, so that, again, we could control. It's a small team. So, how do you control the cash, move cash from point A to point B? And who's allowed to open? So kind of on the bank administrative side, have only key people who can actually open bank accounts and things like that. So all those were part of the journey. bread and butter for Treasury, but all, just putting that in place really did the magic.
Priti, you have been a global citizen, as we mentioned earlier, but what's been your approach to networking throughout your career?
That's a great point. Actually, I think I value it a lot. And I think being in Treasury, that's one of the things I've loved. So when I first moved to Treasury at Altera, that was one of my first questions. How do you meet other people, and how do you learn, and even like from cash management to investments to FX. I mean, when I first joined Treasury, I had no idea how to even go about these things. So what we have is these local chapters. I'm sure it's available, at least in the US, it's very common to have these local chapters. So Silicon Valley has this AFP chapter, the local chapter, monthly meetings. And so I first started attending them. And then, then they, at the year end, they asked for volunteers, because they wanted people who would be involved. And I immediately raised my hand. And so I became part of the committee, and then, starting from helping out to, ultimately becoming the president of the local chapter. But what it really did for me was being able to interact with people, hearing, because we had to choose, monthly meetings were about, let's discuss a topic, what topics do other peers care about, and let's bring the relevant person in. So as I started hearing more, because I was in the, in the middle of it, so I would hear, okay, is this topic important, or this something new is brewing, or, money market reforms are happening, or what have you. So you're kind of, keeping pace with information. That's an easy way to keep pace with information. And then you have to reach out to a subject matter expert, hey, can you come and talk? And then the networking, because you're meeting people, automatically once a month during lunch. So it doesn't take too much of your time, but then there is this consistent way of, meeting with people. And I've loved that. So I've always been very active. I have to say the last 3-4 years, I have not, I've relied more on like annual meetings, and different conferences. But when you're starting out, those monthly meetings, and I encourage my team members, now they are part of the board and committee. So, I say, hey, what's the topic this month? So if there's something interesting, I'll definitely go in. So it's just a way to, I think networking is important, very important, because one, what's happening. So it's an easy way to actually keep abreast of what's happening, of changes, getting to know people. Treasury is a very small world. So, you do cross paths in Silicon Valley, you cross paths multiple ways. So it's good to, get to know them and understand different things.
Priti, what would be, if you could go back to the early part of your career and you could give advice to someone who's at the start of their career, what do you wish you know now, that you do know now that you had known back then?
I would say because I'm still learning. I mean, it's a constant learning, but I would encourage them, which is something I always did, raise your hand, don't think twice, just jump and take on more, don't hesitate. And, there have been phases in my life when, oh my God, I have young kids, can I manage it? And, will I be able to balance? And, luckily I've had a lot of support at home, and, say, you know what, just take it, just do it. We'll figure it out. And so, yes, there is going to be moments where you have the fear. Can you do it? Do you have the technical knowledge? Or, can you cope with it? Can you understand it? There are always going to be some insecurities that creep up. But believe me, nothing is rocket science. Everything, it's really in the attitude. It's not, anything, you can learn anything. As long as, you're committed, you have the right frame of mind. And don't be shy to ask questions. I think earlier, there were points in time where I would wonder, oh my God, if I actually ask this question, will they think I'm stupid? But there's no stupid question. I mean, unless you ask those questions and, no matter how small it is, because then those doubts will never clarify. And then as you get higher and higher, people will assume So it's better to ask and clarify and look at obstacles. I mean, because I kept moving countries and, either there were visa issues or there were, it was not always smooth. I thought I deserved something, but I wouldn't get it because I probably wasn't in the right place at the right time. But, just, don't hesitate, to think that, something is below you or above you. An opportunity is an opportunity. You never know how the door opens for you and, you create something for yourself. So COVID is a great example. I tell my team, I think when we started out a couple of, 2 months ago with this whole credit risk, because I'm responsible for the credit risk. And, we were like almost twice a week, I had to give my CFO, okay, which customers are at risk and which, in the amount of work we had to do to kind of, come up with a plan, how do we manage it? What are we going to do? We already have existing AR, and then what do we do with the sales for the new quarters? Do we just let them do it, or while they're asking for extensions? There were a lot of questions. And the way I told my credit team is, hey, this is our time to shine, so don't look at it as a burden, but this is an opportunity because now all eyes are on us. That doesn't happen often, but when it does, let's step up. So I think that's really the thing. So that's the bottom line.
Priti, when you're recruiting into your team, then what are the things that you look for in your direct reports when you're hiring?
I think attitude. Attitude is key. Again, it depends on the level. Obviously, at a more senior level, you want a little more expertise. But and I have to tell you, the number of interns that I've converted as full-time in my team, because I've seen the hunger, the eagerness to learn. Prior to, 2 years ago when I took over credit and collections, it was a very segregated, there was a treasury, there was credit, there was collections. And then I wanted to start this analytics team. Now, I would say, a sizable, at least 1/3 of the team, I can, hey, we need some help here, you want to develop expertise here, because you may be close to collections, but you can also help with the analytics piece of it because, what you're looking for. So, let's talk to the analytics person. So, work together so that we can actually develop something that will be used by the collections team, but by all of us, So for me, I'm looking for somebody who's more open to, contributing and learning in multiple ways, because I think that's the best way to grow as well.
More the softer skills as opposed to the subject matter expertise is what we're talking about.
That's
And sorry, you just froze there for a second, Priti. What makes a successful treasurer in the eyes of the CFO, the CEO, the board?
It's a subjective one, but I'll tell you something. If I were the CFO, I wouldn't want to be surprised, especially from Treasury side, right? Because risk is a huge aspect, risk management. So then as a treasurer, I would want to make sure that, I highlight any risks that are coming and how I'm mitigating risks. I think one thing about Treasury, probably with other areas too, is, when things are going well, like you're increasing your interest income and things are going well, you're not really going to come and get a pat on your back saying, hey, you're doing a great job. It's only when things are falling apart, the FX losses, your other income and expense is going crazy because it's taking a huge impact on the FX side, or risks are happening, or, the cash balance or, cash from operations, what was expected is not happening. That's when you come under the gun. And so managing, I think always thinking of it as a risk, balance, what's the risk here, and, how do you manage it, I think is keeping management abreast of that, I think is key. And then of course it depends on, how each company is structured. In my case, I feel, being so much a part of operations really helps me understand the business side and help with the risk side as well.
And one last question for you, Priti. Technology is changing really quickly. How do you see the role of the treasurer changing in the next few years?
I think you have to adapt and adopt technology because, like I said, you're a smaller team expected to do more. So how do you get more efficient in things? So, just and this networking and kind of these attending these conferences, what's going on, what's in the market. Like now we started having robots, the bots for the RPA, uploading FX rates and things like that. So that takes away like an hour and a half of my team's time during month end. So these little things, so adopting and adopting technology to augment your function is really key. And then there's definitely efficiencies. I mean, just exposure analysis on the FX side, trying to download reports from Oracle and trying to manually trying to understand versus at a press of a button, you have a dashboard created which tells you actual versus forecast, highlights where the issues are. So then you're focusing on the analytics. So instead of 90% of your time taking to actually get to that point where then you research what went wrong, here it takes you 10% of the time to get to that to highlight where the issue is, and so you have more time to actually analyze and understand the issue and resolve it. So for me, technology is going to be part and parcel of the way you work.
Priti, it's been delightful chatting to you today. I loved your insights. Thank you very much, and I look forward to chatting with you again.
Thank you, Simon. Thanks for having me.